Welcome to Man in America, a voice of reason in a world gone mad. I'm your host, Seth Holhouse. Trump put a truth out on his social media platform, Truth Social, yesterday that has sent shockwaves into a lot of places, but one of the main places is into the communities that I'm part of, the people that have been shouting from the rooftops about Operation Warp Speed. And let me share this with you. I'll read through it quickly and I'll go through it again with my guest on today's show. It says, it is very important that the drug companies justify the success of their various COVID drugs. Many people think that they are a miracle that saved millions of lives. Others disagree. With CDC being ripped apart over this question, I want the answer and I want it now. I have been shown information from Pfizer and others that is extraordinary, but they never seem to show those results to the public. Why not? They go off on the next hunt and let everyone rip themselves apart, including Bobby Kennedy Jr. and CDC, trying to figure out the success or failure of the drug company's COVID work. They show me great numbers and results, but they don't seem to be showing them to many others. I want them to show them now to CDC and the public and clear up this mess one way or another. I hope Operation Warp Speed was as brilliant as many say it was. If not, we all want to know about it and why. This is a very significant post. And it's the first time that I've seen Trump question the success of Operation Warp Speed, which, according to my own research and that of the guests I've had on the show countless times over the past 3 or 4 years, has been anything but a success. It has led to mass death, skyrocketing cancer rates, myocarditis, young kids having issues and dying young, strokes. The numbers just go, the cases are just endless. Autoimmune disorders, it just goes on and on and on. And so Trump questioning this and demanding answers from Big Pharma is telling us a few things. One is that he's been fed information by Big Pharma that does not represent the reality that we are seeing. And the other is that the reality that we are seeing seems to be finally making it across Trump's desk for him to put this post out. And so joining me today is my good friend, Dr. David Martin, one of my all-time favorite guests I have on the show, and the guest that for some reason my conversations with him always seem to go mega viral, reaching hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people. Maybe because it's a timing, and a lot of it is because of Dr. Martin himself and just the knowledge and wisdom and the depth of information he brings to the table. And so on today's show, what we're going to be looking at is what information has he been fed from Big Pharma? How is it full of lies? Is it full of lies? But also, what is the information that he needs to see? And what we'll be getting into today is that the information that he needs to see is so much deeper and broader and far-reaching than, hey, the COVID shots actually caused some harm and we've got some bad things that happen. It is so much greater than that, because the COVID shots are just the surface phenomena of a massive military, pharmaceutical, industrial complex that has been ruling this nation for a very, very, very long time. And so David and I are going to go back in history, back even to George Washington himself, and look at some of the earlier things that even he was on board with in setting the precedent for how medical emergencies could be used to control the population and how it ties into the bankers and so much more. So this is going to be a very, very deep conversation. I hope that you enjoy it. David's a great guest. I ask that if you do enjoy it or if you believe this is important, please help by sharing this content. Email it to your friends, whatever it is, because when you help us to share this information, we need to get it to more people. And as you'll see in the conclusion of this discussion that I'm getting ready to play for you, it is the act of us becoming aware of this information and sharing this information that is the greatest threat to the grip that this deep state cabal has on our country and on the world. And this is how we fight back, is through freeing people's minds. And it's my hope that through the show and through this particular conversation that we can help free people's minds and help them to understand how powerful that we are and how weak and scared that these so-called elites are. So please enjoy the show. And one final request, if you're watching on Rumble, thank you for supporting a free speech platform. Make sure you hit that thumbs up. It helps us to reach more people. So it's one simple thing that you can do. If you're watching on Rumble right now, just go hit that thumbs up, and you'll be helping a lot. So please enjoy this discussion with Dr. David Martin. Dr. David Martin, it is such a pleasure to have you back on the show. Thank you so much for being here today.
Seth, I am always honored for every chance we have to converse, and I'm going to be up closer to your neck of the woods in a couple of weeks, up in New York, so we may find a way to bump into each other. But it's lovely, lovely, lovely to see you.
Thank you. Thank you. I'd like that. Let's talk offline, see if we can make that happen.
Exactly.
Yeah. Yeah. So Trump put out a tweet yesterday that sent shockwaves. I mean, from my perspective, it was the first time he's really questioned the validity of Operation Warp Speed. And that's what we're going to be digging into. But before we jump into that, I actually want to just pull up a little bit of history. So one of the most viral videos that I've ever had was with you. This on Rumble, it got 500,000 views just in this particular instance of it. And it was 3 years ago when we had a video called "Why Does Trump Keep Promoting the Vaccine?" And even again 3 years ago, we were asking the question, now that Trump has seen what's happening, why is he still continuing to call himself the father of the vaccine, to praise the vaccine? And we saw no chink in the armor of this for the past, really since COVID, since Operation Warp Speed, until this tweet. So I'll pull this up. If you don't mind, I'll read through it quickly, and then we'll just dive in together. So Trump tweeted on September 1st. He said, "It is very important that the drug companies justify the success of their various COVID drugs. Many people think they are a miracle that saved millions of lives. Others disagree. With CDC being ripped apart over this question, I want the answer, and I want it now. I have been shown information from Pfizer and others that is extraordinary, but they never seem to show those results to the public. Why not? They go off to the next hunt and let everyone rip themselves apart, including Bobby Kennedy Jr. and CDC, trying to figure out the success or failure of the drug company's COVID work. They show me great numbers and results, but they don't seem to be showing them to many others. I want to see them. I want them to show them now to the CDC and the public and clear up this mess one way or the other. I hope Operation Warp Speed was brilliant, as many say it was. If not, we all want to know about it and why. Thank you for your attention to this very important matter, President DJT." So what are your thoughts on this tweet? And I'll just let you take it wherever you want to go.
Well, I chose the background on my green screen with the battle between Pharma and Liberty, that if people aren't looking closely, they might not see. So, and Pharma, I use the logo of the actual entity called Pharma, PHRMA, which is the professional lobbying arm of the pharmaceutical industry. And the reason I use that is because they are, frankly, at war with Liberty, and they were the agency through whom and by whom the bamboozling of Trump's first administration was exploited, to the point where President Trump himself, in my unambiguous statement, was the victim of an industrial public health coup d'etat. Anthony Fauci said that there was going to be a pandemic. The pandemic was scheduled so that by September 2020, there was mass chaos, which would disrupt the orderly transition of an election process that was a few months away. Obviously, as everyone knows, what we had going into the 2020 elections was, to say disruption was the understatement of the universe. You couldn't freely assemble. There was no free association to have conflicting conversations. Anyone who offered an alternative view was censored. There was none of the due process set forth in the Constitution. And it was brought to us by a pharmaceutical industrial complex that since 1604 has decided that public health is the agency through which orderly constitutional process can be suspended. Seth, most people don't know that the pharmaceutical industrial complex, which in fact is far more insidious than the military industrial complex that we were warned about, has used the Quarantine Act since 1796 and all of its derivatives. 1796, that act was transformed after a giant fight between Jefferson and a number of the others. And in 1799, we instituted the Quarantine Act, which ultimately gives very few public health agencies, all controlled, by the way, by pharmaceutical manufacturers, the ability to, under a threat of a public health emergency, suspend constitutional protections. And that has now been codified most recently in the 1944 Public Health Act. But if you go back and you look, what happened was there was a lie being propagated by the conveyors of a bioweapons program that was unleashed in 2005 when DARPA and NIAID colluded to make SARS-CoV-2 a bioweapon of mass disruption. And the reason why, once again, I refer to that term is because that's the term they used. In fact, if you pull up the slide that has the underlined piece of Ralph Barrick's CV, Synthetic Coronavirus Biohacking Biological Warfare Enabling Technologies, June 2005, is the DARPA MITRE conference when NIAID and Anthony Fauci and DARPA colluded in an antitrust violation to ultimately make the lethal respiratory pathogen that could be unleashed on the population the primary agent of control and manipulation, which gave rise to all the work that we talked about in that short video I did yesterday after Trump's communication came out on the data. But I want to just take us one step back, because the data he's asking for, he cannot get from the companies. And the reason is simple. We have to remember that the whole premise of public health is based on population estimates and statistical models, not on data. And this is very important. If we go back and look at Neil Ferguson at Imperial College at the start of what we called a pandemic, all of the models that Neil Ferguson published, which were these enormously high mortality and morbidity data estimates that were going to come off of COVID, were off by orders of magnitude. The severity of what was called the disease was not. The lethality was not. There was none of the anticipated public health outcry that was required. But even when Kim and I briefed Senator Ron Johnson, and tons of people are celebrating Senator Ron Johnson for his now late arrival at the game of being an outspoken critic of the interventions, but when Kim and I were in his office briefing him, he kept showing me Imperial College data about how there were estimates that a vaccine would save lives. Well, I'm not going to debate whether a vaccine would save lives. What I'm going to tell you is that the injection of the instructions to create a biological weapon inside of a human body will not save lives. And that's not Dave Martin's opinion. That's data that has been around since 2007 and 2009, and we'll go over that in detail. But the fact is, he's asking the criminal to provide evidence of the exoneration of a crime. That's like asking the bank robber who's holding a bag of money on the steps of a bank to potentially offer insight into why checking accounts have a too high, service charge, right? It is absolutely beyond ludicrous to ask the perpetrator of a crime to investigate the crime. And before I close this, I just want to say, Ralph Barrick, the perpetrator who was the biological warfare agent engineer, was the one who was asked to verify that SARS-CoV-2 was not his weapon. Now, I don't know how many people would believe that if a prosecutor had, a handgun, and the handgun had fingerprints on it, and the fingerprints on the gun matched the guy who you then ask, well, did you use this gun in the murder? And giant shock, the person whose fingerprints are on the gun would go, well...
Do you want to know what the future holds? Just watch what the elites are doing. They're not piling into tech stocks or chasing crypto bubbles. They're buying gold, silver, land, and they're building bunkers. Why? because they know that the reset's coming and paper and digital assets won't survive it. That's why I follow their lead. But I don't wait until the crowd catches on. I already hold metals that I can touch. There's no passwords, no middlemen, no permission slips. Because when the system resets, those metals will still have value. So here's the question. Do you want to be one of the ones scrambling for scraps or the one holding what everyone else needs? See yourself in that moment and choose your role now. Go to goldwithseth.com and request your free guide or call Noble Gold at 877-646-5347. The people who act before the headlines are the ones who own the future. Again, that's goldwithseth.com or 877-646-5347.
No, probably somebody with a glove. Maybe one that's a little tight. Maybe it doesn't quite fit. Maybe somebody with a glove used that gun, but it was definitely not me, despite the fact that my fingerprints are all over it, despite the fact that there's ballistics evidence that has flash marks on my hands. But it was definitely not me. Right? That's how ludicrous the, quote, data and investigations around COVID origins have been. And my point has been, if we want the data, the president can very easily have the evidence that's required to show that this was a planned disruption of our legal and our executive and our legislative systems. This was a plan that was put in motion a long time ago. We know that by 2014, the biological weapon that was unleashed on the population was produced in North Carolina. We know it came from a sample provided by the Wuhan lab because they said it did. And so all of the evidence is there. He's just asking the wrong people for the evidence.
So it's interesting because going back to that tweet, and we'll dig into the clinical studies and what they showed and how they recategorized what unvaccinated meant and everything, which is really important. What that communicates is that Trump has been fed two kinds of information. I think the inside people surrounding him, which we know that he was in a den of vipers, and he still is, they were consistently feeding him the information of similar to the report that Ron Johnson was looking at. Look how many lives the vaccine is going to save. Look how many lives. And as much as we can see that there's been a lot of information that has been very accessible, someone like President Trump or say the CEO of a large corporation, they typically just listen to the people surrounding them. Because they don't have time to go watch Rumble videos and everything. And I'm not making excuses for President Trump. I think it's, but just, I've known a lot of CEOs and people in those kinds of positions, and they don't have a lot of time, right? They're not, staying at home on the weekends, eating popcorn, watching, Rumble documentaries. So he was fed that information. But what also seems has happened is that kind of like dripping water on a stone, that water has been the information that you have been feeding, that I've been feeding, that all the doctors and frontline people have been really sounding the alarm about and saying, look, this is killing lives, this is the data. So it seems like what I'm seeing that tweet represents is that he's finally getting that information coming into him, where he's seeing that, whoa, this is Orwellian, right? There's two absolutely opposing ideas here. There's no way they're both true. There's no way that the data from Big Pharma is telling me this is safe and effective. It saved lives. Yet I'm also now seeing data saying that there's been mass death, mass turbo cancer, all the things that we're very well aware of.
Well, and I think that it's important. I refuse to get on the let's bash someone for what we would like to call ignorance, under the illusion that proves that there's some sort of malevolence. And there are people for whom it's a clear and compelling case. And I'm not going to suggest that someone's right and someone's wrong, but I can confidently say that the way the executive branch of this government has been operating for a long time is that there is both an appointed and then there is a layer of bureaucracy that filters information very carefully. And those entities who do the information control are entities who have taskmasters and paymasters. We don't have to look any distance at all to see that in a world whereby a factor of 4 times greater donations are given by the pharmaceutical industry than any other industry in America. And given the fact that every single broadcast network in America is brought to you by pharmaceutical companies, without exception, everything that's an FCC licensed organization is a front for drug dealers, and that is all it is. There is a high probability that if you are the president, and particularly if you are told that there are experts to whom you've delegated authority, to whom you look to have trustworthy information, then anything that comes out that seems to contradict that is going to, by default, be suspect. Now, here comes the problem. The problem is the president still has advisors who have vested interests in industries where the kind of message that I'm sharing is something that is extremely disruptive and highly contrary to the interests of those organizations and individuals. And so I don't want to suggest at all that this is somehow an accusation about, the intellect or the care or anything else that is available in terms of what the president may or may not be aware of. But what I do know is that there is a concerted effort on the part of what we even consider alternative media to not have this particular conversation publicized. We can think of the very notable outlets that get a lot of attention. And with the exception of Alex Jones at InfoWars, the alternative media refuses to break rank with the industrial pharmaceutical complex on the China narrative. They refuse to break rank on the fact that this was not a vaccine under any legal definition. As a matter of fact, I put up in my video yesterday the 2018 publication by the FDA of what a vaccine actually is and what a vaccine clinical trial must include. And not a single part of the FDA's own vaccine clinical studies requirements were actually in what was done under the guise of what we called the clinical trials for the COVID injections. The reason why I refuse to call it a vaccine is because it was not, by statutory definition. This was an injection instructing the body to make a pathogen, which is on the restricted toxins and pathogens list of the select agents and toxins associated with the USDA and with the FDA. This was a biological warfare instruction being injected into human bodies under the guise of this illusion that somehow or another, once your body became a bioweapons factory, you were somehow going to build a natural immunity to the thing that you told your body to make. Well, the fact of the matter is, this does not meet the definition, never has met the definition of a vaccine, but I have been isolated from all of the platforms, including the alternative health advocacy platforms, by insisting that we do not use a term that was used to deceive the public. There was never a COVID vaccine, ever. It does not exist. What there was a stimulation in the human body of the manufacture of a spike protein, which was known by 2017, but going back as early as 2002, was known to cause myocardial problems, both cardiac hypertrophy, myocarditis, all sorts of things. And what we know this to be the case, that all the way back from 2002, when Ralph Baric published the studies on cardiomyopathy, all the way through the modulation of every other inflammatory myocardial event, which, by the way, is the middle reference on the slide you just showed, everyone knew that this was not a vaccine. This was a pro-inflammation spike protein instruction. And then worse still, and this is the deadly one, the top reference, the RNA pseudouridylation, that particular paper, which was published in 2017, showed that the pseudouridine was going to be a pro-cancer, very lethal agent, and that was included in the shot. And the last piece, which is the smoking gun, which is the reason why President Trump cannot look to the industry to get this information. But we know that as recently as 2017, but certainly long before that, we know that the polyethylene glycol, the lipid nanoparticle agent for delivery of the vaccine, was associated with a 62% adverse event, 62% adverse event ratio. And the author of the paper, Tal Zaks, was the chief medical officer for Moderna. So there's no chance he didn't know that the information was there to say that this agent was going to have extreme death and disability as a known outcome. And Seth, these were all papers that I referenced specifically so that people could see that long before 2019, every one of the papers I showed was published well before 2019. All of the death, all of the destruction was known in published literature, which is the reason why the CDC exiles that are now yelling about the fact that Bobby Kennedy is dangerous to science. I'm sitting there going, hold on a minute. Science actually proved that this thing should never have been injected in the first place. Science showed that the polyethylene glycol was dangerous to the tune of 62% adverse event. Science showed that the spike protein associated with coronavirus models was going to have a horrible effect on the myocardial tissue and endovascular tissue. And everyone knew that pseudouridine was going to cause cancer. So follow the science? Heck yeah, let's follow the science. Let's read the science. Because not a single promoter of the injection to this day, if you look at all of the studies that have been done to suggest that there was some sort of life-saving effect of Operation Warp Speed, every single one of those studies is based on a statistical model, not on raw data. And the first shows that Kim and I did back in early 2020 when we were doing our little Facebook Lives that became Butterfly of the Week, I did a very early show on lying with numbers. And I even broke it down for the president. I broke it down for Ron Johnson, that all of this was a manufactured pandemic, which does not exist, never did exist. And ironically, lying with the numbers, one of my first videos, is now, unfortunately, in the history books as the evidence that, lo and behold, we didn't have a pandemic. What we did was we had medical countermeasures that were used to kill people. And that's, in fact, what happened.
So unpacking this, and now I'm going to kind of spit back to you my basic understanding of the bigger picture of this, right? I'll use an analogy or a metaphor here. Let's imagine that an arsonist burned down a church, killed 100 people inside the church, and he drove a stolen car to the church to do it. It's like everyone's hell-bent arguing, was the car stolen or not? Who owned the car? Right. It's like, well, the church burned down, right? The big issue is, and so with this, it's like, it's almost like for a long time, Trump ignored the church fire and just ignored the stolen car and said, well, this arsonist was actually, he was a cop and he was a good guy and he couldn't have done something wrong, right? So now he's starting to look at the fact that, okay, there's a stolen car. Something went wrong. So when he's asking, what does the data show? Why are there people saying that Operation Warp Speed was very bad, which is countering what he's been told?
Right.
He's starting to ask the questions, but that's just kind of focusing on the car. Because of what you're saying is the church that burned down is the fact that COVID was created in a lab in America, right? Released in conjunction with Wuhan.
Yep.
And more importantly, so again, while Trump is now starting to ask the questions of, wait, were the vaccines actually causing harm? Like, were they rushed or something? Like, what's going on there? But what you're showing is actually the real data is that they knew the vaccines were going to cause harm. They knew that they weren't even vaccines, and that there is proof going back even over a decade that shows that the technology ingredients used in the COVID-19 shot caused 62% adverse effects in one study of one ingredient, caused increased rates in myocarditis, increased rates in turbo cancer. Yep. And so, because that's a whole other story. Like that is so much bigger than just thinking maybe the vaccine wasn't as bad as we thought it was. It's like, no, you're missing the point here. You're still focusing on the car. Like the reality is that this is a criminal conspiracy to cause mass depopulation around the world. I mean, that's really what it is if you take it for face value.
Well, and Seth, hate to do this, but I always have to do this. It's bigger than that because we have currently 68 scheduled toxins that, including labs in Ukraine, including labs across the United States, are currently being weaponized through gain-of-function research, even though we are pretending that somehow or another we woke up and said we're going to make it illegal. So we've got a deeper problem. The United States government today is still funding bioweapons programs at universities in America. And it is being funded both by overt National Institutes of Health funds. And by the way, I appreciate what Dr. Jay Bhattacharya, what Secretary Kennedy and others are trying to do. But let's be clear. We are still funding gain-of-function research today. And we are still doing so at laboratories that should be illegal today. So taking your metaphor a little bit further, right? We made the church out of flammable material, right? So it wasn't just a church fire that killed the people. We built a church out of flammable material so that if it caught fire, everybody would die. Like, that's how big the problem is. And we're still talking, to use your metaphor, about the stolen car, maybe. But we are doing this in large part willfully because, as I've said many times, the congressional oversight that ought to exist and the political will to look into this matter unfortunately kicks a sacred cow. And that cow, since 1980, since the passage of the Bayh-Dole Act, is the fact that the United States launders money to public institutions called universities under the guise of science and technology and promotion thereof. And what we do not talk about, and what even the Rand Pauls, right? Why won't he talk about it? Well, go and look at University of Kentucky and look at the universities in Kentucky and ask yourself the question, how many biological weapons programs, how many public surveillance programs, by the way, University of Tennessee, Knoxville, how many partnerships with Oak Ridge National Labs for all kinds of other covert military ops and DARPA projects, how many of those are there? And that's right. Oh, Rand Paul doesn't want to kick that sacred cow because that might mean that his political future is in jeopardy because he's holding people to account. Like, why is it that we don't ever ask the question of Rand Paul, why is Battelle Institute running all of the federal labs in the state of Kentucky or in Tennessee or in any of these places? Why? What's going on with that? And why is it that we don't have any transparency on what they're doing? Oh, that's right, because what we don't want to do is talk about Kentucky or Tennessee or any of the places where allegedly our conservative legislatures are coming from, because they get support from running these covert labs that are continuing to operate today. Research Triangle Institute, the whole RTI program, everything about the Research Triangle Park was set up as a cover for NIAID's collusion with AstraZeneca and with Bristol Myers and with others. the entirety of the Duke, NC State, UNC Chapel Hill consortium, all of that was set up as a massive, massive, massive public money laundering exercise to put money in the pockets of North Carolina representatives and senators. And giant shock, they're not calling for accountability. Where have any of them come out and suggested that UNC Chapel Hill should be part of the investigation? Where have any of them decided that Professor Ralph Barrick should be investigated for the fact that he was somehow mysteriously both the manufacturer of the biowarfare enabling technology and somehow appointed to the committee that was supposed to determine that it wasn't his lab that leaked his lab's material? Right? I mean, if you just put it out in front of the normal average human being and said, have we ever in a due process allowed the criminal to investigate the crime? Right? So let's take your church burning metaphor. Right? We're allowing the arsonist to be the state prosecutor. And I've said many times, you know, you can go back and look at the 1944 amendment to the Quarantine Act, the Public Health Services Act. You can go back and look at the 1944 Act, and you can pretend, as every law journal does, that the suspension of the Constitution isn't really there. But let's go back to Boston, Massachusetts, in the early days of what was declared to be a pandemic. And there was a judge in the first case brought in a federal court that said that no disruption of civil liberties was occasioned by the lockdown orders because, according to his judgment, people still had the ability to communicate online with social media. Now, this is a federal judge who is actually setting precedential case law by saying that there is no due process violation because social media has enabled assembly without having to assemble. Now, one would argue that there's merit to his argument, but for the fact that every social media company colluded with the government to block free association of ideas. So here we have a judicial system which, under the law, allegedly offers due process. But do you realize that there's not a single court in the country that didn't stipulate that there was a public health emergency? To this day, try to litigate the question, was there really a pandemic? And no judge, conservative or liberal, no judge will consider the possibility that the pandemic was manufactured. So we can say that we have constitutional protections, and we can say that the law gives us certain degrees of flexibility of due process. But the problem is there's not a single person in this country who is afforded due process, not one. And so as much as we can say that the law is clear and there is the opportunity to have things like religious exemptions considered, there are all kinds of things that are allowing the public to ask the question of whether or not draconian lockdown measures were appropriate. We allegedly have a judiciary that's accessible to the public, but I've got a very interesting question. Is there any scientific paper on COVID-19 that doesn't start with the same paragraph? That in the fall of 2019, a novel pathogen surfaced in Wuhan, China, and that caused COVID-19 and blah, 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 blah. No, every scientific paper that's published has that preamble. Just like every court in America started with, we know that there was a terrible public health emergency and all kinds of people were at risk of dying from COVID-19. No one has ever stopped to ask whether the stipulated fact is a fact. And so your metaphor is perfect. The church is still going to burn and everybody's still going to die in the burning church. And we're going to be debating on whether the merits of car stealing is a bad thing and whether we should send in the National Guard to work on carjacking. But the problem is we're not dealing with the issue. And the issue is simple. Under 21 Code of Federal Regulations, we have a law that says human experimentation is illegal without informed consent. And this country was subject to an illicit and illegal act under the guise of a pandemic that did not exist, to be forced to take an experimental gene therapy which is now killing and disabling millions of people. And we still don't have a single public discourse, and we still don't have anyone in the mainstream or in the what I would call kind of the recognized alt media who will even have this conversation. And the reason is, the Tucker Carlsons and the Joe Rogans are more than happy to talk to people who are the physicians treating the injured, and that's important. And I think it's great that the injured get their voice. So people like Peter McCullough and Pierre Corey and others, Ryan Cole and others who are wonderful voices who are speaking on behalf of the injured, I celebrate their success all the time. But they are unfortunately missing, once again, the point. The point is that we have a system that is still absolutely blind to the fact that since 2002, since the publications of every one of our annual biological weapons reviews since 2002, not a single organization in the public sphere has actually asked the right question, which is, why is it that in 2025 we still sanction biological weapons production in the United States? And why is it that we still allow DARPA to test biological weapons on this population? That's the question that we're not asking.
You mentioned the sacred cow. I think like that question is looking at starting to form that sacred cow. And I want to just give my understanding of kind of what the picture you've painted of that sacred cow is. That I know that, I'm not sure when, but there was a biological weapons treaty signed, right? You probably know the year of that, basically saying that there's a global recognition that militaries will not develop biological weapons to use as weapons of war. Would you know when that was?
Yeah, except we didn't sign it.
Okay. So
and people who yell about the Nuremberg trial, it's important to point this out. The United States was the Nuremberg trial. Let's get really clear. It was a U.S. justice who was the chief justice of the Nuremberg trial. Everybody came to the conclusion in a series of accords that we shouldn't have biological weapons, and the only significant country that refused to sign the accord that came from our jurisprudence in Nuremberg was the United States.
Well, there you go. And so the sacred cow is basically, I'll do my best to say this concisely. Our government and all the different complexes that are intertwined with it, the pharmaceutical industrial complex, the military industrial complex, the big tech industrial complex, something evil is basically controlling all of these things in unison. Yeah. And the government can't openly come out and say build things like Palantir or Facebook or Pfizer. This massive industrial complex, it can't do those things, or the surveillance industrial complex. And so what they've done is they have found ways of using quote unquote private companies, using universities, etc., through government contracts and private contractors. So they have basically taken all the illegal, illicit activities out from under the umbrella of the government directly, which requires congressional oversight and transparency. And they have, in essence, moved all of that criminal activity out to the universities, out to big tech, right? Facebook, perfect example. DARPA's LifeLog shuts down the day before Zuckerberg launches Facebook. Same thing with Palantir. Palantir got its start, what was the first 7 years? I think their only customer was the CIA. Same with Oracle. Same with so many of these companies. And so that's the sacred cow that no one's looking at. You even mentioned, I think, Rand Paul is not looking at the fact that our own government, and you can't really say the government, it's just, you call it the deep state, the cabal, this criminal layer at the top of our society that extends beyond all national borders, is utilizing this entire infrastructure that happens to be within the walls of our country to develop weapons, surveillance technology, all kinds of things to be used against we the people.
Yep.
And but by moving it out to these outside organizations, they can wash their hands of it. Same with, say, some sort of private military contractor gets caught attempting an assassination of a president in a third world country. So no, that was Blackwater. That was a different. That was a private company. They were private contractors. It wasn't the Navy SEALs in there doing it. So our own government is clean, free and clear. Is that an accurate picture of what that sacred cow is? If you are a family member or on Medicare or turning 65 soon, you need to listen to this. Medical enrollment is full of misinformation. And the more confused you are, the easier it is for scammers to steer you into overpriced plans that make them more money while claiming that they're unbiased. So Trump's DOJ just sued 3 of the biggest Medicare brokers in America for allegedly doing exactly that. The victims, Americans just like you who deserve better. For me, I trust Chapter because I did my research. Chapter's advisors make Medicare simple and always put you first. They listen carefully, compare every plan, and help you get the most savings. On average, they save people $1,100. These guys won't push you to choose one plan over another. And if you're already on the right plan, they'll tell you that instead of trying to get you to switch for their financial gain. So choose the right Medicare plan for yourself with trusted guidance from Chapter. So give them a call today at 777-801-5366 to make sure your Medicare plan works for you. Most people wish they had called them much sooner. Again, that's 773-801-5366.
But yeah, and we have to remember that going back to, I remind people, go back to the establishment of the first bank of the United States. This is George Washington's collusion with Mr. Girard, who happened to be the largest opium dealer and also the funder of the first bank of the United States. And ask yourself, hold on a minute. So you're telling me that the opium trade and the liquidity of the opium trade, which is a direct derivative of the British East India Company since 1604, you're telling me that even Washington relied on drug money to fund the formation of this country? And lest you worry about it, the second Bank of the United States was also funded by an opium dealer. So in case you're wondering, the history, unfortunately, is exceptionally full of this very problem. To your point, there is, Tocqueville's celebration of this amazing country and this amazing experiment, the house on the hill, the beacon of liberty, all of those beautiful hyperbolic statements, all of which are beautiful and wonderful and aspirationally true, unfortunately met the reality in 1796. Go back and look at the congressional debate about the Quarantine Act. People like Jefferson thought it was an affront to allow an unelected, unappointed, and unaccountable party to unilaterally just say, oh, yep, we're going to go ahead and suspend, the public's interest because, somebody decided that there was potentially an outbreak of the plague or of smallpox or whatever else. If you go back and look at the debates between 1796 and 1799 in this country, the battle was whether or not public health was going to have hegemony over the civil liberties of the United States of America. And guess what? The people lost. I mean, this is absolutely insane. And if you go back and ask yourself, Seth,
David, in May
was this?
Sorry, go ahead. I was going to read this real quick. In May of 1796, Congress adopted the first federal quarantine law in response to a series of deadly yellow fever epidemics. The law, entitled An Act Relative to Quarantine, was adopted by the Third Congress and signed by George Washington without much controversy. The remarkably simple law consisted of a single paragraph which provided as follows.
Right.
That the President of the United States be, and he is hereby authorized to direct the revenue officers and the officers commanding forts and revenue cutters to aid in execution of quarantine and also in the execution of health laws of the states, respectively, in such manner as may to him appear necessary.
Yeah. Isn't that interesting? may appear necessary. Isn't that a great standard? Isn't that fabulous that you have to, what, have a test to make sure that the rats on the ship really do have the plague? And why is it that the revenue officers are the ones that get to make this call? Oh, that's right, because it turns out that if you go back to the 1500s, the papal decrees that supported the quarantine acts then, and by the way, we use the word quarantine because it's the suspension of movement of goods or people for 40 days. It's the Latin quarenta, which is 40. That's why we did it. But if you go back and look at why they did it and why the Pope said that public health is gold, quote, public health is gold. Now, let's go ahead and play that one just for a second. It turns out that, let's say, Seth, you and I both are shippers, and you are the favored shipper, and let's just say I'm a wildcatter. I'm bringing tea in from someplace. And both of our ships arrive on the same day. Now, you, because you're the sanctioned shipper, already have sold your cargo. The last thing you want is to have the price to be eroded because there's 2 shipments of tea at the same time. So guess what we do? We throw a rat on my boat and then allege that there may be plague on my boat, which does what? It keeps my goods out of the market for 40 days because they are seized by revenue officers. Get it? This was always about profiteering. There was never a quarantine act that didn't have a financial motive behind it. And the reason why there's never been a standard, and by the way, when I say never, there's still to this day under President Trump and Secretary Kennedy is not a standard. This is something where the allegation that there might be a public health emergency suspends all due process. So we can sit here and pretend that somehow or another we live in this constitutional republic, blah, blah, blah. We can do all the things we want. But the fact of the matter is, this was weaponized in 1796. The Quarantine Act of 1799 re-weaponized it. The Public Health Act of 1944 re-weaponized it. And all we have to do is we have to have the allegation that there might be a thing that might go wrong, and suddenly we do not live in anything other than an absolute controlled monarchy. And the monarch is the drug companies that build the weapons that ultimately kill humans.
Man, so basically, for over 500 years, and probably more, the bankers and the drug dealers have been using public health as a way to control and manipulate society, commerce, etc. And it's the same story over and over again, even to this slide right here in your presentation where Peter Daszak,
which they say that's what they're doing. Read it. We need to use the hype to our advantage to get to the real issues. Investors will respond if they see profit at the end of the process. That was the 2015 statement that actually gave rise to the pan-coronavirus vaccine initiative. Are you kidding? These are the perpetrators in their own words saying that this was about investors getting a profit. This was collusion, this was racketeering, this was fraud, this was Section 802 of the Patriot Act violation on domestic terrorism, this was coercion, and they sat there with absolute and abject indifference towards any part of what it means to be America because they knew they could get away with it, and they did.
So, similar to what in my opinion, looking at the Great Depression, I believe that to have been an orchestrated event with one of the desired outcomes to be getting rid of all the small localized banks and centralizing the banking industry in America. You fast forward to what was one of the economic results of the pandemic is that we saw that all your local mom and pop businesses and restaurants were closed down, yet Walmart was open, Target was open, Amazon was still delivering. It was the same thing. It was a massive shakeup to centralize power. And that's what it's always been over and over and over again.
Every time people forget that the Great Depression was also accompanied by the Dust Bowl, and the Department of Agriculture was motivated to take what was allegedly an environmental crisis, which is what we called the Dust Bowl, and use it as a way to once again foreclose on small family farms and give rise to industrial agriculture, out of which companies like Monsanto, Pioneer, Hybrid, and others, all sponsored by red state universities, all could get the control of agriculture in America and get us addicted to corn syrup and get us addicted to genetically modified seed.
Glyphosate.
Get us addicted to all kinds of other things like, I don't know, the deadly glyphosate and the deadly Bacillus thuringiensis modified toxins, which are used in every genetically modified seed crop, which, by the way, since 1902 was published to cause leaky gut, gut disorders, irritable bowel syndrome, all of those things. But we couldn't find that science because it was written in Japanese. So the science didn't exist. So follow the science? No, we didn't mean follow the science. We meant follow the propaganda that is produced by the companies that we are willing to listen to, not follow the science. Because if we did follow the science, the 1902 Japanese publication, which proved that genetically modified seed crops using Bacillus thuringiensis was going to create a 40% population GI disturbance, was clearly not relevant because it was published in Japanese. Right. I mean, these are the things where the problem, and this is the tragedy. I mean, you have organizations like the CDC and NIH and others where they pretend that somehow or another there's this public interest in science. But the papers that I showed on this presentation were the papers that were funded by them. Right? I mean, the 2010 paper that Ralph Baric published, which became the Zelenko Protocol, was published by a lab using NIH money. We knew that hydroxychloroquine worked. We knew that zinc ionophores worked. We knew all those things, but we wanted to kill people with remdesivir, also made by Ralph Baric. We wanted to murder people with a deadly agent that in the MAP studies with the World Health Organization had a 53% lethality rate. The coronavirus, even if it was a virus, even if it came out of a lab, has never killed 53% of an infected population ever. Remdesivir does. And the spike protein does harm the heart. And the wonderful pseudouridine unleashes cancer that kills people. We knew all this stuff. It was all right in front of our face. And we're pretending today to still think that somehow or another there's a question on, did it come out of a lab in China? Was it, offshore gain of function? You need to pop up that one slide I have there, Seth, which is the October 2014 letter from NIAID, which is the letter that authorized UNC Chapel Hill to continue to take the synthetic coronavirus. It's the image on the left there. And that letter from NIAID, October of 2014 to UNC Chapel Hill, specifically says that they are authorized to continue their gain-of-function research. If you scroll down just a tiny bit,
sorry.
We lost it there. But if you can expand that and scroll down to that Project One description, and you look at the fact that in that Project One description, it says... Oh, there you go.
Sorry.
Yep. That's okay. Role of uncharacterized genes in high pathogenic human coronavirus infection. Ralph Baric. Specific aims. Novel functions of the virus replication in vitro. Novel functions of virus pathogenesis in vivo. Seth, not only did they do gain-of-function research, according to NIAID, they put it into living animals. They did it intentionally, and they did it in North Carolina in 2014 under the direct written authorization of NIAID. And how many times have we heard anybody besides present company, make reference to that letter, which is in the public record. Oh, that's right. We don't want to kick the sacred cow, because if we did that, every university that has a BSL lab, every university that's doing DARPA-funded projects would be under public scrutiny. And we can't afford that because elections are around the corner. We've got midterms, and we have to have corrupt universities and corrupt state governments who get money from the federal government through the grant systems that have been in place since the 1980s. We need to make sure that all of that money keeps flowing, because that's how we take elected officials and mysteriously, under, I don't know, employment conditions that give them what, $200,000 a year, suddenly can overnight have $30 million in their bank account. How do you think that happens? So, yeah, wouldn't it be nice if Pfizer gave President Trump some data?
I think we're arguing over whether the car that was stolen was a stick shift or a automatic.
That's exactly where we are.
And so, looking at the future, I mean, it's taken Trump, close to 9 months just to start even asking, was there potentially a problem with Operation Warp Speed? Something that you and I have been talking about for going on 4 years.
Yeah.
Even if he put a lot of focus on this, maybe it might take another year or 2 years just to get to the point of realizing that there was also a fire in the church, let alone getting into anything beyond that. Yeah. And before you know it, they've got Gavin Newsom in, and kiss goodbye any chance of this, or JD Vance, or say Palantir Vance, right?
Yeah.
Which I don't have a lot of hope in him coming in and turning things upside down. Looking at his ties to Peter Thiel and everything. But
he was put into the Senate by Peter Thiel, so he's going to continue to know where his paycheck comes from.
Which is one of the major companies that we are discussing here, right? One of the major military industrial complex, big tech complex companies. And so,
well, and one of the largest donors to the Trump election. I mean, Peter Thiel, was very instrumental, along with Bob Mercer and others, in making sure Trump got elected. So, I'm once again, if you're asking the bank robber to investigate the bank robbery, you're going to get an outcome.
But I want to ask you, you and we did an interview, maybe it was a year and a half ago or a year ago, that I think it got 600,000 or 700,000 views. And we talked about the dead rhino.
Yep.
In 300. Yep. And the story that you were putting forth, the concept you're putting forth, was that this massive system, this deep state cabal system that we've started to paint a very vague picture of, this massive sacred cow, has actually died already. And what we're seeing now is the momentum of it falling while still causing mass chaos.
Yeah.
So where do you see this going? Because when you look at what we've identified today, even here in America, it'd be easy to say we're screwed beyond belief. And even George Washington, our hero of liberty and divine providence, even George Washington signed off on the first Quarantine Act. So how can we possibly blame Trump for extending beyond the 2 weeks to slow the curve, right? How can we possibly get through this? Is the cow dead? I mean, what do you see next? Like, how do we work ourselves out of this? We're massive,
killing all kinds of vertebrates, cows and rhinos and everything else. So Seth, you know that I've been doing this since 2002, and I take great comfort in the fact that it took us from 1776, and if we're really historically accurate, from 1774. It took us from 1774 to 1815 to finally negotiate what the future of the United States v. Britain relationship was going to be. Because as much as we like to celebrate the late 1780s and say we roughly were done with revolution, we weren't really done until we got done with the War of 1812. And so, by any mathematic account, we're a long, long, long way from the outcome of whatever revolution takes. I think there's a lot of people in America that think that when a firework goes off on July 4th in 1776, I think a lot of people think that somehow or another, it kind of was like Lexington, Concord, and then I think a surrender. That's how it worked. That's not how it worked. It was at least 1774 to 1815. Okay. So we are in the early days. I've said many times, at best, we're at Valley Forge, right? Which is when the Benedict Arnolds come out, just to let you know, historically, the metaphor holds. So not giant shock. We're going to see, the Benedict Arnolds that come out. But I look at it from a very simple standpoint. I do a lot of workshops. I have people who come and kind of learn how I do what I do and how Kim and I build, the relationships and the individual strengths that we have to do the things that we do. And what I know is this. I had a couple weeks ago, I had probably 30 or 35 people at my last 12 Senses workshop. And I watched 30 people who came in not knowing that ever since, Augustine and others, we were not allowed to consider that maybe we had more cognitive and sensory capacity than the church officially sanctioned us to have. The 12 senses that we have, not the 5 senses, are actually meant for not only our benefit, but for the benefit of community. And I watch over 4.5 days, 30 people go from average, normal human beings who have extraordinary potential to people who can never forget what 4.5 days did to transform their lives. And I do this, a couple times a year. And what I see is that the hunger that people have to genuinely look at the dream of America, which, and if you haven't read Tocqueville, I highly recommend it. If you haven't read Jefferson's letters, I highly recommend it. Why? Because there's a picture of what would happen if we looked at humanity as fundamentally good and capable. Not a humanity that's in desperate need of a paternalistic control system that actually manipulates and manages and micromanages every day of their life. If we see a humanity that has a huge amount of untapped potential and a huge amount of opportunity to work individually and together to make a better world, the fact of the matter is there's nothing but hope. Because what happens, and remember, if we go back even to the early days of the revolution here in this country, the real meetings were in taverns and in churches after hours with 20 or 30 people who got together and talked about a better picture for humanity. This was not some sort of mass consensus operation where some marketing agency got everybody on board with tea and taxation. No, it was conversations that took place where people got together and started unleashing the vision and the dream of what it meant to be the best version of humanity. And what we got was the beautiful work of people like Madison and Jefferson and others who actually had a gorgeous way of putting these concepts into writing that we still can look at today and reflect on. So why is it that against the face of all of what people might think of as hopelessness, I'm so enthusiastic? The truth is, I'm enthusiastic for a whole bunch of reasons, not the least of which is at 58 years old, I'm still learning and I'm still growing and I'm still being challenged by people and perspectives. And I see myself as a constantly evolving perspective with greater insights, greater clarity, and greater compassion for the people who are actually at different stages on this journey. And the fact is that conversations like the ones you and I have had, if we go back and look at it, Seth, once upon a time, it would have been ludicrous for us to say 700,000 people listen to our conversation, right? Not that long ago, if we said that, people would go, oh, guys, that's delusional. 70 maybe, but not 700,000, maybe I think there's one of yours on some platform that's 1 million or 2 million or some insane amount like that. And if we would have said, yeah, we can do that, we would be laughed off the stage because we're not entertainers. We're not Taylor Swift, or we're not, Elton John, or we're not Lady Gaga. We're just two guys follicularly at opposite ends of the spectrum. But besides that, finding a lot of other common ground. And so the real message is simple. I think Trump is starting to question that narrative because the drip, 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 drip of a unchanging message that I've held since 2002 is starting to have an effect. The constant conversations that you host and curate is starting to have an effect. And rather than worrying about who gets the credit for it and who gets the Congressional Medal of Honor or who gets this or that, the other thing, what we're able to do is say, no, what matters is we the people. What matters is we are going to have a moment when we collectively recognize that there's a better expression of humanity, and that better expression of humanity is the one that we're manifesting. And so I'm nothing but optimistic, and I am certain that over a period of time, whether it is immediately, whether it's in weeks or months, I can guarantee that it's not going to take us from 1776 to 1815. I know that because we're already way ahead of the curve on getting a public embrace of what we're talking about. I was in Florida a week and a half ago with a major group of Republican Party leaders and major donors, and I can tell you that this message is landing very well for them. Very well. And I'm being invited into circles I had not anticipated ever being invited into, and they are warmly receiving the things I'm saying. And I think that in time, we're going to see that these little steps, the little tiny steps that appear to be inconsequential in the moment, are in fact of great consequence in the long term. And I honor the fact that you have been one of the amplifiers and the clarion horns sounding this message for a exceptionally long time. And it's a pleasure and an honor to do this with you every time we do it.
Well, thank you. I mean, honestly, thank you for saying that. And you make a very important point that I hadn't thought about. I think it was during the revolution. They talked about how it was only a few percentage, was it 2 or 3% of the population that drove the entire revolution, right? That birthed the country that we are now residing in. And it's a good point to actually say, even, I would say collectively, our discussions have reached millions and millions of people. Yep. And there's been other discussions that have reached far more than that. Some of your statements that you've made at whether it was in the EU or the parliamentary, some of these things have reached probably tens, if not more, of millions of people. Yep. It reminds me of one book I want to pull up really quickly. I have the physical copy, but it's sitting too far away for me to grab it right now without pulling my headphone out. This book called The Crowd by Gustave Le Bon. Are you familiar with this book?
I am. Yeah.
Okay, I figured you would be. Maybe we've discussed it before. But just to give a quick point of this, it was a book written by a guy named Gustave Le Bon in France, late 1800s, I think 1896, if my memory serves me correctly. He was a polymath, and he wanted to understand what caused mass societal change, what caused the rise and fall of empires, what caused the collapse of governments, what caused the birth of new governments. And I've heard different people talk about how he was actually funded by the elites to do this, to understand how to, it's almost like this is Edward Bernays 1.0. Right, that a lot of his work became the work that Edward Bernays came into, with mass marketing and population control through propaganda. But something that was so profound that came out of this book was that he detailed it, and I have it highlighted in my physical copy, but I'll do my best to paraphrase it, was that what drove change in society was never a particular leader, a particular group of of powerful individuals. It was always the collective thinking of the people that drove the change. That's right. Over and over and over again. The fall of Rome wasn't because of the corrupt politicians. It was because the people had become corrupted. They weren't guarding their virtues, and that's what led to the collapse of Rome. And so if you look at this and you apply those same principles to where we are right now and the drip, 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 why is President Trump now starting to question Operation Warp Speed? For one, because we've had conversations about that reached millions of people where we've been asking
exactly right.
Trump, this is the evidence. Why are you not seeing the evidence? It's the collective, and not just us, because we're just two people, but every person who has viewed these interviews, that shares these interviews, that reposts the clips, that cuts the clips up, puts them on Twitter, that clip goes viral. It's that Trump is still beholden to we the people. As much as you can see there's a lot of very powerful forces that are controlling and dictating his decisions, at the end of the day, the elites, the cabal, whatever you want to call them, they still answer to us.
That's right.
And the only way they win is if we become complicit and we don't realize the power that we have. And that's what I think the Great Awakening is. It's we the people realizing that we hold the keys. We have the power. And that's what I'm seeing. I'm seeing a lot of people realizing that and just saying, I'm opting out. I'm not going to follow that. I'm not going to wear a mask. I'm not going to take the vaccine. I'm going to share this information. I'm going to print off flyers. I'm not going to be scared to talk about it with people. And that's what we're seeing. And that does, actually, that gives me hope, because from a bigger perspective, if you look at this as a battle of good and evil, what you can see is that represents the evil losing its grip over our souls, which I believe our souls are inherently good. I believe that God put these souls into our bodies, and that we've been deceived by Satan and his minions of this realm. But we're coming back to that place. We're becoming human again in the way that God wanted. And I guess it's funny, because actually that gives me hope. It's not. Yeah,
of course.
Yeah, that's what it is.
And why not? And like I said, I mean, I love the fact that I get to see on a fairly regular basis people who go from, in the space of 4 days, I get to watch them go from the way they walked in to the way they walk out. And the cool thing is, it's 100% effective, because all it has to do is open the window of possibility. That's it. You don't have to get it all. Just hold open the possibility that you potentially are better, more equipped, more sensory aware than you thought you were. And the minute you have that, you can't unknow it.
Exactly. Well, David, as we wrap up, I'll pull up your website, fullylive.world.
Yeah.
There's you and your beautiful Kim. Up at top, 12 Senses Workshop. Yeah. You have a workshop coming up.
Yeah, we have one
in November.
Coming up here in November, and we are very excited about it. It's filling up again, and it's going to be in Northern Virginia, and we're delighted to do these. It is a joy to watch communities form, and then once they form, stay engaged. We had participants from Greece and Switzerland and other parts of Europe and all across America. The one that we did a couple weeks ago, and we have an even more global reach. This one based on our current inbound folks. But yeah, I mean, this is something that we care very deeply about, and it's about the content, yes, but it's really more about the community that builds and stays connected and stays engaged. And I am deeply honored, and I'm super grateful that we've had this chance to build what is a growing throng of people who are passionate about surfacing the very best that humanity can be. And the honor I have to work with Kim on doing this, where we share our lived experience. So we share a lot about the raw and the challenges and the joys that we've had. We make ourselves human in the process. And the beautiful thing is, we don't have to have popularity, and we don't have to have influence to be absolutely essential in the unfolding story of humanity. And I am grateful that we have the ability to celebrate that on a very regular basis. So we're very much looking forward to another beautiful experience in November, and then wherever that takes us. So that's coming up.
Again, fullylived.world. I'll put that URL in the description for the show.
Beautiful.
David, as usual, I'm blown away by our discussion. I'm inspired by it. I learned a lot. And I always enjoy having you on. I thank you for making the time for these conversations. They're important conversations. And I'll ask anybody that's made it to this point in the conversation, make sure you share this information, because that's how we get these to millions of people, these discussions.
Beautiful.
And to me, this is the discussion is that the power is in our hands.
That's
God gave it to us. We just have to take it. Thank you so much, David. It's such a pleasure.
Always an honor, Seth. We'll see you again soon.
All right. It is my hope that you enjoyed that discussion as much as I did. I think that it uncovered a lot of the hidden hands and shadowy organizations controlling our government and controlling the world, but also showed us how we can fight back against that. So I'll remind you again, if you enjoyed it, please share this content. But there's one other thing I wanted to talk to you about, which I've mentioned in a few shows before, is that we're actually building a community. So with Man in America, specifically Prep Like Noah. So I've got a book coming out called Prep Like Noah. And what it is it's really a look at our current world and looking at analyzing, are we living in the days of Noah? Are we living in times where the evil is running rampant like it was in the days of Noah? And I would say yes, personally. But it's also looking at a practical how-to of how to be more prepared. I think if you ask the average person, you say, do you think in the next 5 years we might see another pandemic or a massive recession or blackouts or any number of things, increased natural disasters? I think most people would say, yeah, I think that that's going to happen in the next 5 years. But the question is, are you ready for it? And some people, yes, they're ready. Say, yep, I've been prepping for 10 years. I've been preparing for 20 years. I've got a garden, etc. But for a lot of people, the idea of prepping is really overwhelming. And I can tell you that writing a book on it has confirmed that there's a million different topics. You get into water purification, home security. Do you freeze dry? Do you dehydrate? How do you build community? How do you communicate? How do you protect electronics in a grid down scenario if there's an EMP? There's so much. And so that's really the purpose of writing the book Prep Like Noah, is to tie it into a deeper spiritual reason for preparedness and an obligation and a duty to be prepared, but also then give a very practical how-to guide that's easy to follow, that's not overwhelming, to help make sure that you've got your bases covered. But as part of that, in my own journey of preparedness, what I've realized is probably the most important thing about being prepared is having a community. That's kind of what Dave and I were talking about towards the end of the interview there. And so we're building a community. It's an online community that is going to be all about building offline connections, so where you can meet people that share your same values. You can meet experts. So if you have a question about solar or a question about how to clean an animal or animal husbandry, that you can actually connect with real people that are part of a community that share your values, and you can learn from them and you can teach them. And you're going to have access to informational videos and tutorials and training to basically try to take the idea of preparedness similar to the book and make it easy and accessible and hold your hand and give you access to the knowledge and the resources that you need to prepare properly for the future. So the community hasn't launched yet. We've had a few preliminary meetings with our pillars of the community, the individuals that want to get help on the ground level to build this community. But if you're interested in this, if you want to be part of it, if you want to learn more about it, if you want your name to be put on the list just so that you get an announcement when the community opens up for registration, you can email community@preplikenoah.com. So just shoot an email, say community@preplikenoah.com, and just introduce yourself or just say, hey, put me on your list. And I'll make sure that you have access to it. And once the community is ready, we'll make sure that we contact you about it and let you know that, hey, it's ready. Come on in. I'm very excited about it. I think that we'll be launching it within the next probably 30 days or so. We've got a lot of the infrastructure built now and everything. So it's going to be a very, very exciting thing. So again, if you want to be part of that, if you want to learn more about it, even if you just want to be notified when it's available, just right now, shoot a quick email to community@preplikenoah.com. And I'll make sure you're on that list. Take care and God bless.